Welcome to another segment of Africa Answers, a series that features young African leaders who will be unpacking topical issues affecting Africa and proposing solutions to those challenges. I am your host, Silindile Mlilo. Today in studio, I have my guest, Jocelyne Tsonang. She's from Cameroon and she's an environmentalist specialist and expert on natural resources. Jocelyne, thank you so much for joining me and welcome.
Thank you, Silindile.
Cool. So, Jocelyne, today we'll be unpacking circular economy. This is a term that's not really popular or that most people will be familiar with, right? When we think about economy, we think about your linear economy, right? Can you unpack for us what is the difference between the linear economy that we know and circular economy?
Thank you, Silindile. Just to say that we've been practicing circular economy, especially in Africa for centuries, but just that it was in terms of circular economy. Circular economy as a terminology is relatively new, but the concept has been existing as long as the earth has been existing because the nature in itself is circular. So circular economy as opposed to linear economy. So what is linear economy? First, linear economy is an economic model that follows the take, make, dispose scheme. So you extract the resource, you use the resource maybe to produce a service or a product. Then after when you no longer need the service or the product, you dispose of the service of the product. Then you extract another resource. So, and that is like a resource intensive and wasting a lot of resource. Circular economy now, it's an economic model which is opposed to the linear economy, which main principle is to keep resource in use for its longest time possible while maintaining its highest value. So it's not just about having a specific resource in use for the longest time, but making sure the resource keeps its highest value as time goes. So its circular economy is mainly based on three principles according to Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which the first principle is to regenerate natural systems. So a circular economy would not destroy the natural systems, but would rather want to regenerate it, and it is going to design out waste and pollution. So from the design phase, you make sure a product or a service that you're manufacturing, you're putting on the market, does not produce waste or pollution in the first place. So making sure pollution or waste is not even produced before trying to eliminate, because as opposed to what we see today, we intentionally design waste, we intentionally design pollution. Then once it is designed and the product comes to life, we now start thinking about how to do away with the waste. So in a circular economy, we do not even want to produce the waste in the first place. So one of the principles, the third principle is to keep material in use for the longest time possible while maintaining its highest value. So generally, the circular economy is an economy that takes care of resource, regenerate the natural system, and do not produce waste and pollution.
Great. I have a couple of follow-up questions. Like I say, this is something new for me, and I got acquainted to circular economy by being with you through the fellowship, right? You mentioned one thing. You say that circular economy has been there, right? This is not a new concept. This is not a new discipline, right? But it's just not as common or popular as the linear economy. Why do you think that is?
Circular economy has been there, like I said, for instance, in Africa, we don't just throw off things because We have the sharing economy, for instance, has been there in Africa. The repair economy has been there in Africa, and it's thriving in Africa. Even if when you no longer need something, you always find someone to give the thing to. You don't just throw it off. And we always reuse things in Africa. We don't, just waste things. Maybe out of necessity, but maybe not. Maybe not. So some people do it out of necessity, but most people just know that this is the way things should be done. So just to say that we have been practicing, but without terming it secular economy.
Yeah, yes, that's what I'm getting, because when I know that growing up, I would pass down clothes that don't fit me to my younger cousins or, siblings. So
Exactly.
I guess, like you're saying, that is something that has been there, that we've been practicing it, but maybe in the, in terms of like in the scholarly, intellectual space, we haven't really been talking about it.
Exactly.
Great. And then when you were mentioning some of the three elements that circular economy consists of, you gave an example that we design pollution, right? What do you mean by that? And can you give us practical examples?
When I talk, for instance, about that we design pollution and waste, we've just been in Europe for 3 months, and when I look at the amount of waste I have produced during my stay in Europe for 3 months, that is like maybe the equivalent of the amount of waste I will produce in Africa for a year. That is like the per capita waste. Because when you go to the supermarket to shop, you buy meats, for instance, you have meat in a polystyrene box, you have a plastic paper. When you buy it in a polystyrene and a plastic paper, at the end of the day, they give you another plastic paper to put the polystyrene and the plastic inside. So just for you buying 50 grams of meat, you already have a huge amount of waste that you've produced. So, but whereas in Africa, our models are rather different. So we use less packaging, for instance, maybe out of necessity, as I said. So then you ask yourself, is this amount of packaging really necessary for this product that I'm buying? How can I buy just 50 grams of meat with this amount of packaging? You will see even the size of the packaging. This packaging is oversized, and you will see the quantity of meat in that packaging. Then you ask yourself, could they not package this meat otherwise in order to minimize the amount of waste that they are producing? So you see, they are consciously producing waste at the beginning of the value chain. Then now you need to deal with the waste. Some people are going to sort the waste. Some people are not going to sort the waste. But even after sorting, you are not sure of how the sorted waste is being managed. Which proportion of that waste is being recycled? Even in the recycling process, you need labor, you need energy, you need water. So the energy, the water, and the labor, you're still using some resources. It is taken from somewhere. So you're still using resources in the recycling process. Then you come back to the question, was the production of that packaging of that size really necessary? So you see, it becomes resource intensive. Whereas if they had just made a minimal packaging for the meat, you will still have your 50 grams of meat, well preserved, but with very little amount of packaging. Then they intentionally reduce waste at the design phase. So that is like one example of waste. Then pollution, plastic causes pollution, definitely. Even you have plastic leakage. You have plastic leakage that will cause pollution in water bodies. You have plastic leakage that will cause pollution in soil and many other aspects of pollution. So that is just like one example you can take among many other examples.
Yeah. This is so interesting. I'm going to go back to the example you mentioned on plastic, but can you also, because you've given an example of how waste is being generated, right, from the maybe Italian context, since you're here in Europe, but from on the flip side, from Cameroon, using your example, which examples can you give from your context where pollution is being created?
From my context, where pollution is being created, I will maybe take the example of second-hand cars that we buy from Africa. Most of our cars, how many people buy new cars in Africa? Most of our cars are like second-hand cars. Maybe this is because the average person cannot afford a brand new car. For instance, it is rather expensive. Then when we have these second-hand cars, they are highly polluting, you know. So then we start to pollute, but maybe that is not pollution. That is pollution due to the fact that it is combustion engine, but the engine was made that way. The engine was designed to pollute. But through innovation, we can think about how to design the engine in order for it to be less polluting, because as a car is aging, the car pollutes more. Then how can we design a car in such a way that even as it is aging, the pollution level can still be kept low? That is just like an example. I will also take an example maybe of the use of chemical fertilizers. For instance, in Africa, we depend a lot on chemical fertilizers that we use, and that are sometimes imported. So even in the importing process of those chemical fertilizers, the travel, there's the use of fossil fuel and everything. So you see there's already an amount of pollution produced at where the chemical fertilizers are manufactured. There's pollution to transport from one spot to the world to another spot to the world. There's pollution in the value chain, and even when it is used on the soil, there's pollution, some sort of pollution in the soil and in the water bodies. Whereas, and it is also deteriorating the quality of the soil. Whereas we can have maybe natural fertilizers, for instance, composting, that can be used from maybe agricultural waste and other organic waste to manufacture natural fertilizer, organic fertilizer locally. That will not have to travel that long. Then you see the amount of pollution maybe generated from the agricultural value chain already is being reduced, because when you're going to use a chemical fertilizer, maybe that is being imported from Russia, from Ukraine, or from Morocco, and to maybe Cameroon. Then when the food you're producing is found on the market and you want to maybe assess the quantity of pollution that food on the market has generated, you have to go back to the start of the value chain where the fertilizer was being produced. Then you're going to assess the level of pollution that has been generated by that specific food being put on the market. Whereas if the chemical fertilizer is cut off and you just use maybe the natural fertilizer whose value chain is maybe shorter, definitely now the pollution footprint of the product or the food product put in the market is going to be lower. Then you design out pollution in that food production value chain.
Yeah, you've already started talking about, you know, some of the solutions that we could be looking into, right, in your response. But going back to the issue of plastic that you raised, right, we have an example of Rwanda, which I think, if I'm correct, has a total ban on plastic. I remember when I landed in the airport, the first thing that happened was I dropped my bag in Johannesburg in the plastic, and when I was passing through security, they told me you have to go back and dispose of that plastic. So do you think such, you know, such examples are solutions? And do you have any practical examples in different African contexts, or even in the world, if you will, of, you know, best practice approaches that people have started adopting?
Yeah, banning single-use plastic is actually the best practice because it has been proven that we can do without. As you mentioned, Rwanda, yeah, Rwanda has been more relatively successful in that. Some other countries have tried, but not as successful as Rwanda has been in banning single-use plastic. So the issue of plastic and the plastic value chain is more complex than we think, because when you look at plastic packaging, for instance, plastic is very cheap. So plastics is very cheap, and plastic is being manufactured from fossil fuel, and most of the plastics is being manufactured from fossil fuel. And the fossil fuel business is thriving because it's enjoying a lot of subsidies. So these subsidies on fossil fuel are fueling the single-use plastic business, which is making it difficult for other alternatives to be competitive when it comes to single-use. Because if you ban single-use plastic, definitely you need an alternative to the single-use plastic. But most of the time, the alternative is not affordable as single-use plastic, because single-use plastic is being funded by sometimes public funds, which is a bit controversial. So countries that have gone ahead to ban single-use plastic, yes, that is a great step, but more should be done than just banning the single-use plastic. You need to also support companies in eco-conception, how they can do away with this overuse of plastic, and how they can find alternative to plastics packaging. Even other kind of packaging are not that carbon footprint free. But the thing is, even if you're using whether can, whether paper packaging, whether plastic packaging, you just need to make sure it is not resource intensive. You need to make sure it is not creating pollution. You need to make sure that it is not destroying biodiversity as well. So we need to look at it holistically, and not just have the focus on a single stream of kind of packaging. So packaging is just one of the many other sectors when you talk about circular economy. For instance, you have other sectors like the built environment, you have the textile industry, you have the agro-food system in its own, you even have the energy, because yeah, in the Western world, when they're talking about circular economy, most of the time they will not talk about energy, but us in Africa, we need energy because we have close to 500 million people on the continent who do not have access to energy. And that is the kind of most basic need for a human being to have. So how can we leverage circular economy to make energy accessible to the people? How can we leverage circular economy in the built environment? How can we leverage circular economy in food systems to fight malnutrition maybe on the continent? Those are most of the questions, because at times we tend to focus a lot on packaging, plastics, and we think circular economy is just about plastics or packaging, but circular economy is more than that. That is just one sector among many other sectors where circular economy can be applied.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on the energy, right? That the West has energy that we need, right? And that sometimes, and even the example that you gave of the plastic and how, you know, the value chain of, I guess, disposing of it also uses up energy, right? So in light of this, why do you think there's shortage of energy in Africa? And how can we work with the West to be able to, I don't know, equalize or make sure that we are working together to curb this gap that's on this other side of the continent, which is our continent?
Yeah, still in line with that, I think we need technology. We need technology, and we need the technology to be affordable, And we need transfer of technology, we need transfer of skills from one side of the world to the other side of the world. I mean, it's a give and take. So now you see Europe is negotiating deals with many African countries to get the green hydrogen. That is what Europe is also getting from Africa now due to the cutoff from the Russian gas. So in return of that, what are we getting? I think we need to make sure that there is a give and take or a kind of win-win in the partnership, because we cannot keep feeding the other side while we do not maybe think about the basic needs of the people on this other side. Europe has the technology, we need the technology, we have the raw material, they need the raw material. So we need to see how we can balance up while we're giving out the raw material. Then the local community or the people on the ground should also benefit from that. So in the framework of circular economy too, the use of renewable energy is one important component in the circular economy, making sure the energy source that we are using is renewable. And Africa has a great potential of renewable energy. We have the sun, we have the wind, we even have biomass that can generate. And we have a lot of waste on the continent. When you look at, for instance, the forest exploitation industry in Africa, and you want to compare it with the forest exploitation industry in Europe, the gap is so wide. You can see, for instance, that in 2019, Europe revenue from the forest sector was $100 billion.
When you say forest sector, what do you mean?
When I talk about the forest sector, I want to talk about forest exploitation in general, maybe timber, forest product like furniture, anything like forest services. Yeah. So I was trying to give a few figures here to compare both sectors on both continents and to tell you how circular economy is really needed in Africa. Maybe just taking the example of the forest sector. In 2019, the revenue of EU in the forest sector was about $100 billion. In the same year, this revenue for Africa was about $6 billion. So you now see that Europe's revenue of forest exploitation is like 17 times the revenue of Africa in forest exploitation. But the forest cover or the forest surface area of Africa is 4 times larger than the forest cover of Europe. Then you ask, how can a region that has 4 times less forest cover have 17 times more revenue from that same sector? Then there is a problem. Then you come to think of it, then you try to look at the value chain of the forest sector in Africa and the value chain of the forest sector in Europe. Then you try to compare. Then you see that there is a lot of waste produced from the forest sector. And when we talk about waste, we do not just talk about product, but we talk about also services that the forest can render and that can be monetary, like the carbon market, for instance. That is not valorized because revenue will not only come from tangible things, but intangible things like maybe the carbon market also can be exploited to create that. And the carbon market is can work for the forest industry if and only if they apply some certain standards to get there, to get some certifications, to make it happen. So it now comes to the fact that circular economy in the value chain first will make them avoid the quantity of waste that is being generated from forest exploitation. If at all the waste is being produced, by applying circular economy, they are going to create byproduct from the waste and make more money from the waste generated from there. From the byproduct that cannot be transformed into some other, or maybe the waste that cannot be transformed into any tangible product at all, at the end can be valorized for energy. And we were talking about energy, how energy is badly needed in Africa, and most of the rural or the neighboring communities of this forest area do not even have access to energy when they are living in the midst of abundance. So just to tell you about like some of these three things, how the circular economy can really help to solve the socio-economic challenges of Africa and can help to generate more revenue in many sectors.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, Jocelyne, like, as a person who's working within the space, right? And when I started, I said I didn't know anything about circular economy, or at least maybe the definition of circular economy, the textbook definition of circular economy, let me put it that way. But when you explained it, it's something that, you know, we've been practicing, or I have been practicing. So in light of, you know, the climate change crisis that we're experiencing, and we just, you know, we are off the hills of COP27, right? What are things that can be done at a grassroots level, right, to contribute to the space, you know, or what are initiatives that are currently taking place? Because you're already working in this space. What are things that are happening on the ground?
Things that are happening in Africa?
Yes, yes. Or even in the world, if you have best practice examples of programs or initiatives that are taking place.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of initiatives that are happening, whether in Africa or elsewhere in the world, but still bringing it back to circular economy, and circular economy being a tool to combat climate change, among solving many other problems. For instance, if we can just talk about maybe the African Circular Economy Alliance, which
you are part of?
No.
No.
I'm part of the African Circular Economy Network.
Okay, yeah.
Which is different. The African Circular Economy Network is an NPC, not for profit, based in South Africa, but with representatives in many African countries. The African Circular Economy Alliance it's like a government-led initiative for circular economy in Africa. So it's made up of governments. But the African Circular Economy Network is a strategic partner to the African Circular Economy Alliance. So the African Circular Economy Alliance now has set up like the African Circular Economy Facility, which is a fund that is going to, I think it's the initial fund, it was like 4 million euro, which is going to help government set circular economy policies or circular economy roadmaps in place, and also support some circular economy business on the continent, because we have a lot of good circular economy initiatives on the continent. I want to talk maybe about one initiative in Cameroon that I know, Clean Energy. What they do is they use old refrigerators and fridges, they remanufacture them and they power them with solar energy. And this now is helping maybe in communities where they don't have access to grid energy to store food, and as they are storing food, it is also helping to reduce food loss. For instance, you know, normally the world is not hungry, it's just that a lot of food is being lost at the production level from there. So this and there are initiatives like this. There are many on the continent, but they just lack support maybe to scale up their technology. And this is also where this partnership between Europe and Africa it's needed to change experience, to help or to support these young entrepreneurs on the continent who are trying hard to make sure we grow, but by preserving the planet, in order for them to like really strengthen their capacities and improve on the technology that they are already using. So like the African Circular Economy facility is there, but the funding is not enough. So definitely they will need another partners to come in with the funds so that they can support more circular economy initiatives on the ground. And Europe and Africa, they are kind of good trading partner. I think Europe is one of the most privileged trading partner of Africa due to geographic proximity and maybe the colonial past and other ties. So we have a lot of trading going on between both continents. Definitely, their circular economy strategy, there should be a kind of alignment between the circular economy strategy of Europe and the circular economy strategy in Africa, because we have a lot of second-hand goods leaving Africa going back to Europe. So if Europe is trying to be circular because they have a circular economy plan and shifting their waste to Africa, then do we have the capacity to manage all the waste? What are the regulations in place? What is the alignment? What is the producer responsibility? For instance, you see the e-waste that are leaving Europe and other parts of the world. I just want to focus on Europe. It's true that most of it is also coming from Australia and the US and going to Africa. So when a good leaves here, like the good is already like at the end of life and goes to Africa, now you have to deal with a lot of e-waste, and most government in Africa do not even have the capacity, the infrastructure, the right infrastructure in place to deal with this waste. And when the e-waste is not rightly disposed of, it causes pollution of water body, pollution of soil, causing a lot of diseases in children, lung diseases, and many other cancers that can be generated from that. You saw from the last class the Abogloshi e-waste dump site in Ghana, where you have a lot of e-waste coming from the Western world, and how the mismanagement of that is really causing a lot of problems to the population, not just the population, but the soil and the water bodies and all the contamination going on. So there needs to be the close collaboration between both continents or between both regions in order to make sure there is an alignment in their circular economy strategy and circular economic plan.
Yeah. So, like, I mean, if we're talking about climate change, isn't this contrary to basically what we're trying to achieve? And why is it that African leaders are allowing waste coming from the West to enter Africa?
That is also my question. Maybe, I don't know. You know? Maybe if we have an African leader listening to us, they can tell us why they are allowing that. So, yeah, they need to be, because most of the time when you ask the question, they will say it is your responsibility to make sure you control what enters your territory. So definitely, we will not expect others to control what goes out of your territory. We should be proactive by controlling what enters our territory. I mean, that is where we need to call African leaders to take up their responsibility and protect their people from this waste, unnecessary waste coming in, because even the waste generated on the continent, we don't have the infrastructure to manage. Then what about the waste coming from somewhere else? So there should really be strong regulation to make sure we can handle this. So there is e-waste, there is textile waste, there is other streams of waste that we need to handle, and also monitor the transboundary movement of waste. This is where transnational governance comes in.
So, I mean, like, just to wrap up the conversation and speaking on leadership, is there a regional, from an African continental level, is there anything in place? Is there a plan? Is there an action plan that is a secular, action plan that's put in place at a regional level to address some of these issues that you're bringing up?
Exactly. At a regional level now in Africa, there's none, but I heard that the African Union was looking in that direction because EU has its circular economy plan as a region. So we also need that as a region. It's true that there are some governments, some individual government like Rwanda, for instance, like Cote d'Ivoire, who are trying to set up their own national circular economy roadmap, but that is not enough because we need the regional circular economy roadmap. We even need the RECs to have their circular economy roadmap, because there is this trading relationship between countries. If, for instance, in Cameroon, we are trying to ban single-use plastics, and our neighboring Nigeria is producing it, definitely there's going to be some leakage of the single-use plastic from from Nigeria to Cameroon, and that is what we have been experiencing, and that also has been one of the reasons of the failure of the single-use plastic ban in Cameroon. So there should be a sub-regional approach, there should be a regional approach, and there should be an intra-regional approach.
Yeah, definitely. And speaking on trade, I mean, I'll be speaking to Teniola on the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, right, which is really gaining a lot of support and momentum, and we're hoping that it will take shape and will actually eventually be implemented. But during all these discussions, do you think that the conversation on climate change is missing, right? And you working in the space of circular economy, what are the conversations that we should be having? What are the things that we should be thinking about when we are thinking about trading between African countries?
Yeah, when we are thinking about trading within African countries, I think we should avoid the mistakes of others, and we should try to learn from others, because now I'll still take the example of Europe, since we are here, and we came here to learn from their best practices and see how we can implement back home. Now, for instance, Europe is changing its energy strategy due to the problem, or the Ukraine and Russia problem, and the cutoff of importing gas from Russia. Then it has maybe helped Europe in such a way, in one way, that they are now speeding up their shifting to renewable energy, because now it is no longer, it is like a matter of urgency. They're really feeling like, we need to shift very fast so that we can really phase out this fossil fuel. But then phasing out fossil fuel also has a price to pay. They will need to mine a lot of critical raw materials, then creating another problem, because mining also comes with a lot of environmental impact. Then they're thinking about the strategy, how they can make sure that all the products maybe coming into Europe are produced in a sustainable manner. And now the Europe, with their carbon legislation, for instance, specifying that if you're producing on the EU territory, you need to abide by some rules and make sure there's a level of emission. You cannot, the threshold of carbon emission, you cannot go above. Of even if you're producing that way, you need to buy the carbon on the market, and the carbon on the European market is becoming more expensive, more and more expensive. So we are almost going to 100 euro per tons, which is very, very expensive. So now some manufacturers want to go and manufacture outside Europe and come and sell. But now the EU is working on some legislation to make sure that even if steel, for instance, is manufactured out of Europe, before it comes in Europe, you are still going to pay the tax. You see? So that is now, maybe there will be a kind of conflict with the World Trade Organization to say no, that is not how the trade legislation works. because that was not like taken into consideration while drafting the trade legislation. So the African Free Trade Continental area can learn from that. If we want to trade freely, then we need to think about the sustainability of the products that we are trading and making sure the products that are circulating from one country to the other are produced in a sustainable manner. Then we are putting that at the base. If you know you want to trade with the rest of Africa, make sure your product is sustainable. Because if your product is not sustainable, you're going to pay this additional tax. So all the manufacturers and all the government who are not engaged from the onset already know they need to shift to sustainability in order to have access to the free continental trade area. So those are some of the lessons that we can learn from other regional bodies in order to make sure that we are developing in Africa, we are trading in Africa, but we are doing everything sustainably.
Yeah. So legislate and then action will follow.
Exactly.
Great. Jocelyne, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Same
I
here.
didn't know anything about circular economy, but I think I am getting it, and the importance and the role that it's playing within the climate change, the fight for climate change and addressing issues of climate change, let me say. But in parting, you've been here for 3 months.
Yeah.
In Florence. To learn about Africa-EU relations, how we can make it work, what we can learn from each other. What are the key things that you'll take away with you when you go back to Cameroon?
The key things I'll take away is that nobody's going to fix our home for us. We need to stand up for ourselves because in multilateralism, it's all the interests. Everyone will want to fight for their interests first. So we need to have an agenda as Africa and not be on the menu, because if you do not make the menu, then you are eating. So China has Africa strategy, US has Africa strategy, EU has Africa strategy, Russia has one. Then what is Africa's strategy with EU? What is Africa's strategy with Russia? I've never heard there is any. Maybe I'm ignorant. So we are always on people's agenda, but we are not putting others on our agenda. So we also need to learn to put others on our agenda, know precisely what do we want from each of the partners. And I think that is the basics. We need to start from there. And also, one, governance. That is what I'm taking home. Governance is the basic that is going to help us solve the multiple challenges that we are facing in Africa. So if there is one thing we really need to fight for in Africa, is good governance.
Thank you, Jocelyne. If there's anything that I've taken away from you being with you these past 3 months, is that you are passionate about Africa. You are passionate about bringing change within the African continent. Thank you so much for talking to me. And
Thank you,
I have no doubt that you're going to go back home and drive change.
Thank you.